Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Robert McBride. I work at All Classical FM here in Portland. I'm sure it's preset number 1 on all your car radios, right? Okay. I heard a few people agreeing in there. And this would be Carlos Kalmar, the music director of the Oregon Symphony.
Good evening.
Probably the most talented man in the room. But he wears it lightly.
Oh, no.
See what I mean?
Don't start like that.
He's modest. He's a modest man. He has put together a very interesting program tonight. The first half has very powerful religious overtones, begins with the serene and radiant prelude to Parsifal, Wagner's last opera, has to do with the Holy Grail. Then Mendelssohn's Reformation Symphony, both of which not only have to do with faith and Christianity, but even quote the same little bit of religious music in that tradition. Then things sort of change. After intermission, we have a relatively dark piano concerto by Mozart that you don't get to hear very often. And then the other side of Wagner's religious coin, you sort of flip that over and you get Liszt's diabolical Mephisto waltz. That's a pretty interesting program, don't you think?
I think this is it's a great program because I thought about this, that usually programs, if they have something, a dramatic undertone, it's sometimes works that we are getting from darkness into light. I mean, very often, because composers at the end of symphonies very often write the last movement like not all, but has an uplifting tone here and there. And in this case, in this program, you look at the dramatic point of view of the program, and it's we come from God and we go to hell.
And we're going to enjoy the ride too.
Oh yeah.
All the way down. I was amazed to read in the program notes that you have that the Oregon Symphony hasn't played the Prelude to Parsifal for 52 years.
Yeah, and I read that too, and I was so embarrassed about that. Not because it has not been playing for 52 years, but it has not been played for the time I'm on this planet. I have to admit it.
Wow. Tonight we're going to fix that.
Yeah, please.
Late Wagner is kind of like, and this is late, he's 69 years old. Well, he worked on it for 24 years, but he conducted, or no, he didn't conduct the premiere of the full opera, but it happened about 7 months before he died. Late Wagner kind of reminds me of late Sibelius in that they both got more and more refined, stripped away all the extraneous stuff and tried to get to the most pure part of their art. In Sibelius's case, he took it all the way to nothing. Just quit writing altogether. Does late Wagner strike you that way? It's so pure.
I would say it doesn't strike me as the same as Sibelius, because I think the principle that when a great composer gets old, most of them will write music that is, it doesn't have all the she that earlier compositions have. Matter of fact, some composers are out there that we all love that stopped composing altogether. I mean, there are so many composers that had their best years between ages 20 and 50, if they even get to be 50. I mean, Mendelssohn missed that by a very long shot. So did Mozart. And then when they are after 50, maybe even after 60, it's less stuff. Last week, if you have been here, we played Prokofiev 5. That is great piece, great energy, the peak of Prokofiev's work, and then he wrote only 2 symphonies, and the last one, 7, is it's basic. And Wagner, well, I mean, the point is that in our pre-concert talk that we have 30 minutes to explain ourselves and to talk about music, and we could even talk about Parsifal for probably more than an hour, easy, without much, because we are talking here about not only a music that is very late in Wagner's life, the music that is a compilation of so much stuff, the opera itself. I mean, the obvious is, yes, it has some Christian influences, but it goes way beyond that. It has philosophy in it, some of Eastern philosophy, some of German mythology is there, and then, of course, some of Wagner's own beliefs. On top of that, the music, not the music that you are going to hear, the topic of Parsifal is extremely controversial, and there have been very loud voices over the years who say that Wagner, in this opera in particular, is quite anti-Semitic. In the end, I think one should not really care too much about that. I don't think he was anti-Semitic in his music. In his personality, oh boy, you don't want to meet that guy, Wagner. As much as I love Wagner, but I mean, he, for example, just one detail, he really was opposed to the conductor of the premiere. The premiere of Wagner's Parsifal was in Vienna, conducted by Hermann Levy, and Wagner opposed that because Levy was Jewish, and etc., etc. Big things.
Humans, they're
I mean,
crazy.
Wagner hated or despised the composer of the second piece, Mr. Mendelssohn, in part because he was Jewish. So, but let's not get started with that because it never ends. And also this entire mixture in the Parsifal of this, a little bit of this philosophy, a little bit of that one, a little bit. In the end, it all came about that one of the undoubtedly greatest philosophers in Germany and of the world, Friedrich Nietzsche, wrote a kind of a pamphlet against this piece, saying that the theme of this piece and the thematic and the story and blah, blah, blah are all incredibly despicable. And only a couple of years later, when Nietzsche heard the piece, he said, this is one of the best pieces I've ever heard. Yeah. So go figure. So that's it. And in essence, the good news about what you're going to hear today is it's very slow music, incredibly beautiful. It will be around between, I don't know, 13 and 15 minutes, somewhere around that. And you don't have to sit for another 4.5 hours until you reach the end of the conclusion of the opera. That's the good news. This Vorspiel, prelude, has only 3 themes. And all of them have somehow religious character in the big scheme of things. And the middle one of those has, it's what we call the Dresdner Amen theme. This is, it's a scale. It's an upward going scale with harmonization that was composed, I think, somewhere in the 18th century, middle 18th century, in Saxonia, which is Eastern Germany. And it's very linked, and it was sung all over the place, in churches, all the time. And it was sung very, very often in the city of Dresden, in Saxonia. And that's why it's called the Dresdner Amen. And Wagner utilizes that. And whenever a conductor plans to do Wagner's Parsifal prelude, it's kind of a no-brainer to let that follow by the Reformation Symphony by Mendelssohn Bartholdy, because he utilizes the same Dresdner Amen theme in exact the same harmonization. It's like state the obvious. It's like telling a room, 2 and 2 is 4. Did everybody get it? Yes, everybody got it. So that's why it's there. Aside from the fact that I am kind of personally opposed to the belief that Mendelssohn himself had about his Symphony No. 5. Mendelssohn actually thought the Symphony No. 5 is a failure. And I think, no, it's not. It's a great piece.
And not only does it include that beautiful Dresden Amen, but also A Mighty Fortress is Our God, the chorale that some believe was written by Martin Luther himself. And Mendelssohn uses it in such a glorious, uplifting way. And it's interesting that he thought this symphony was a failure. By the way, it was published after the others, but it was actually written before the Scottish and Italian symphonies, which are much better known. Why do you think he thought it didn't work?
Well, first of all, Mendelssohn as a composer was very hard on himself. I mean, he very often corrected things that he had written earlier and dismissed music. And second, this symphony that you're going to hear has, at least that's what I think, it has actually one problem. In a way, I don't know about the 19th century when the piece was actually finally played. Many years after Mendelssohn had died, by the way. He never heard the piece. But the ending of the piece is a problem. The first movement is actually brilliant. The second and third are in itself wonderful movements, although they have nothing to do with the theme of the symphony, nothing to do with either church, Reformation, Christianity or anything. It's just music. And the last movement, which starts in such a sublime way and uses A Mighty Fortress is Our God, the old Lutheran chant, so well, then at the end, the final climax is reached in a way like it's not so natural. He writes, you have to get faster, and then there is the theme again, and there are another, I think it's 11 or 12 bars, I didn't count them after that. And it's not that it doesn't make sense, it leaves at least me, who a conductor who adores Mendelssohn, with the feeling that he could have done better. How? Please don't ask me. I don't know, but there is something missing, and in the end, also the way we will play this, there is the interesting point. You don't have to go and buy several recordings of this symphony just because I'm telling you this, but we conductors, in terms of how to shape this symphony, we pretty much, let's say, agree on the first 3.5 movements. I mean, I wouldn't say it's all the same, but along the line. And then when it comes to the end that I just described as being the problem, then we go in very different directions. Because at the end of such a great, meaningful symphony, you kind of think like, yes, that's what you wanted to say. Big ending. And that's what some of my colleagues actually do, and they stretch the ending very much, and there are trumpets and so on. And I just did it in a different way.
A more classical way.
I lost Mendelssohn's phone, so I don't know. I wouldn't say it's more classical way, but it's. I don't want to explain what.
Right, it'll be
just
interesting to hear.
Listen to how it ends, and that's pretty much it. By the way, because we started our conversation and talked a little bit about anti-Semitism. Interesting point is that Felix Mendelssohn Bartholdy, born Jewish, converted into and baptized. So he converted, as well as his entire family. And he was actually, Mendelssohn later in his life, a true believer. I mean, he didn't convert because it was a good thing to do in those years. His father thought it was a good thing to do, because Felix Mendelssohn's name actually is Felix Mendelssohn Bartholdy. And Mendelssohn, in those days in Germany, you of course recognized where he came from. And so his father said, don't use this hyphenated name, name yourself Felix Bartholdy, and you will stay out of trouble. But Mendelssohn always said, my name is Felix Mendelssohn Bartholdy.
So why do we not use the Bartholdi these days?
Because I think hyphenated names are so hard to remember.
On the subject of God, before we get to intermission and then get into the different side of the coin on tonight's program, on my way here tonight, I was behind a car. You know the little fish thing that represents Jesus that some people have on the back of their car, and then there's the one that has Darwin written on it, and they've riffed on it in various ways. I saw one on the way here tonight that had the word dog in it, which of course is God spelled backwards. These cute little feet. Okay, just thought I'd share that with you. It's the Church of Dog at my house, I'll tell you. I love that little guy. Okay, intermission, then a different pianist than you had hired.
Let me just say one thing again about the Mendelssohn Symphony. There is even more interesting stuff in the Mendelssohn Symphony. Aside from the composition, just a little story something that I had the pleasure of witnessing without expecting it. A mighty fortress is our God is the chorale that opens the last movement of the symphony. I don't know about churches in America, but it's one of the most popular songs in Protestant churches in northern Germany, which is where the Protestants are. Now, I lived many years, ever since I moved to Europe, in Vienna, which is Catholic. And I always liked Mendelssohn as a composer and liked the symphony, so I thought, and not everybody knows this piece. So one day, I think it was around 1989, I conducted this symphony in Hamburg, northern Germany. And it was very obvious the people in the audience did not know the piece very well. So they listened through the first movement, the second and the third, and then the third and the fourth are linked together, and the flute initiates it with a little call of "A mighty fortress is our God." And this moment of an audience gasping because they heard something that they heard in church every Sunday that they didn't think it would happen is one of the precious moments for me as a musician.
Nice. Thanks for sharing that. You reminded me of a story told to me by a composer named Imant Ramic, who lives in Canada. He grew up in Latvia, left when he was very young, never went back. And a Canadian choir was going on tour there, and they asked him to write a piece because they thought it would be nice to take back to that country some music written by someone who had escaped from there in the dark times of the Soviet era. So he looked through a book of songs from Latvia. He didn't know anything, knew nothing of the music. He picked something that he liked, and he wrote a little piece, and he gave it to him. So the choir goes to Latvia. They sing their concert. They're doing some encores. They're so well received. They pull out Imant's piece, and they begin to sing it. And the entire audience rises to their feet and stands solemnly to listen to the piece. And they found out afterward that that melody was the unofficial underground Latvian national anthem during the Soviet occupation. And of all the pieces that he would pick, he picked that one. Isn't that great?
That's a great story.
Life is amazing. All right. So, can we talk about pianists now?
Let's talk pianists.
All right. Jeffrey Kahane was going to play this program, this C minor piano concerto by Mozart. He is ill, so he had to cancel. And William Wolfram has been booked in his place. I love that name. It's a very literary name. I mean, you know, Lord Wolfram or something. Had you worked with him before?
Yes, once. We worked together in St. Louis, where, interesting enough, coincidence, he also replaced a colleague. I was there to conduct Chopin 1.
He's not an ambulance chaser pianist, is he? He goes around.
No, but I mean, you have to be very glad to have a pianist of this caliber who is sometimes available and things work out.
How much notice did you have?
In this case, we had 3 weeks' notice because Jeffrey Kahane has a wonderful manager, a really good manager who said, guys, watch out, Jeffrey is sick and I do not think this will work. She gave us way advanced call, and so we put the calls out, and when finally Jeffrey cancelled, we went after Bill.
He's a handsome man, judging from the picture in the program. My goodness.
Well, the funny part is that Bill is, I mean, he's a very tall man, and yeah, and then he plays Mozart. It's funny.
So, why this particular Mozart piano concerto?
Where should I start? First of all, Mozart piano concertis.
They're all wonderful.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter. Pick one. It's like, it doesn't matter, they are all beautiful. But it's like in Animal Farm. All piano concerti are beautiful, but some are more beautiful than others, if you remember that. And this one, because it is time to play it by the Oregon Symphony, it has been a while. Second, because it